One of my jobs is to enforce laws, including laws that are there to protect health and safety, to protect consumers, and that's what's brought us into this fight around vaping and e-cigarettes. Project Here is a program that my office started, and it's a program, an educational program, available to every public middle school in the state, free of cost. And it's a great program that consists of a curriculum that schools can implement over the course of a year. It's teaching young people about health and wellness, how to make healthy decisions. It's teaching them about substance use and substance use disorder as well. We added a new component focused strictly on vaping and the dangers of vaping. And it's about empowering these kids with the skills to recognize what is a threat to their health and also recognize, too, the effects of peer pressure, right? That's important because we know that kids are more likely to use and more likely to vape based on the effects of peer pressure, right? Somebody else is doing it, they're going to want to do it, or maybe more likely to do it. So one of the things that Project Here does is bring kids together and teach them how to build their self-esteem, how to build their confidence, how to address anxiety, right? Normal stuff that young people go through, and give them the skills to be able to sort of stay strong in the moment and make good decisions, healthy decisions for themselves. And in fact, it was through my going around classroom to classroom around the state with Project Here that I first learned about vaping over a year ago. It was, I was there in part talking about the opioid crisis. That's what led my office to create this program because the state really didn't have a statewide program on this issue. And I thought it was really important to get into middle schools as well. And so in the course of that and those conversations, roundtables with 5th and 6th and 7th graders, that's how I learned too about how pervasive vaping was and knew then that we needed to do something about it. I really understood that this was a huge issue. It was the issue that parents talked to me about. When I was out visiting schools, it was what I would hear about from students themselves, from coaches, teachers, school nurses, and the like. And I saw that this was a huge epidemic, that we as a state needed to get ahead of it, and that it was really something that was going to require a lot of focus and attention. And I've had a really strong team on this for over a year now. To address this issue of vaping and juuling in our schools and across our communities, especially among young people. Let me give you a little bit of perspective here. Years ago, we had a big fight with tobacco. Big tobacco. In fact, it was state AGs that took on tobacco companies. It resulted in changes to policies and practices, a significant settlement and monetary payment penalties for their unfair and deceptive marketing practices and sales practices. And then, over many years, here and across this country, we worked hard to reduce smoking rates, including smoking rates among young people. And in fact, smoking rates have gone way down when it comes to young people. But here's what we also saw happen recently. In 2015, there's a company out of San Francisco called Juul. Juul came to market with a big social media campaign that, in our view, is and was targeted towards young people. Why? Because it was about creating a whole new class of consumers. I think that Juul is an example of a company that's found ways to exploit this market through its marketing practices. The e-cigarette market is about a $2 billion industry right now in this country, and it's growing. And our concern is that companies like Juul and others are out there engaging in sales and marketing practices that have a direct impact on young people. More and more young people are vaping, they're juuling. I was up in a school recently and I remember a school nurse told me that she thought 80% of the kids in her high school were vaping. When I sit with a group of 7th graders and I ask them for a show of hands, how many of you know kids your age who were vaping? Every hand in that classroom went up. And that is a huge issue. Why? Because it affects kids' health. One pod of a Juul or other device is equal to 1 pack of cigarettes in terms of its nicotine content. And not only does it contain that nicotine, it's a very potent nicotine, and it's delivered very quickly into one's system. We know from doctors, and I've spent a lot of time talking to pediatricians who are treating kids today for e-cigarette nicotine addiction, that this nicotine really has a significant, serious adverse effect on the developing lungs and brains of young people. So that's why we're going hard at this issue, both taking action against these e-cigarette companies, but also really trying to educate parents and the public about the dangers. A couple of things. One is flavors, and that's really important. We think that there should be a ban on flavors for e-cigarettes. Why? Because we know that these flavors particularly are meant to appeal to young people, and they're what attract young people in many respects to these e-cigarettes. You can imagine a flavor, and I've heard this from kids, I've heard this from parents. They think that what's coming out is just a water vapor. It's harmless, and in fact it smells fruity, it smells good, it smells like sugar, when in fact all that's doing is concealing the really detrimental amounts of nicotine. So we know from studies that flavors are tied to use, that increase use among young people, and we think we need to do everything we can to cut against that, to work against that, and banning flavors is something that's really important. I've also, though, called for something else to happen, and that is to tax e-cigarettes. Right now in the state of Massachusetts, we tax cigarettes, combustible cigarettes. We should have the same tax and the same requirements for e-cigarettes that we do for combustible cigarettes. That's something I'd like to see happen as well. Eon Smoke is a company that, in our view, based on our investigation, engaged in really unfair and deceptive marketing and sales practices. Eon Smoke, like Juul, like these other companies, did a few things to really target the market of young people. They offered product in the form of multiple flavors that would appeal to kids. We're talking about things like gummy bear and cotton candy and mango and other fruit flavors that are really directed towards young people. They marketed skins. Skins are the materials that go over these vaping devices. A lot of the times these vaping devices come in the form of a USB flash drive, for example, and there are skins that you can put over them, like you do your iPhone, for example, with characters like Superman and Captain America. Again, just an indication that they are looking to target a certain audience. And so Eon Smoke, not only in our view, engaged in unfair, deceptive marketing practices, because you're not allowed to sell e-cigarettes to anyone under 21 in the state of Massachusetts. We also viewed them as having violated our laws that require age verification. Anybody selling into the state needs to, whether they're an online seller or they're selling in a convenience store, they need to verify that the person who's buying the e-cigarette is at least 21 years old. And we found evidence that that wasn't happening and that that company wasn't using age verification processes as they are required to under law. We've taken a number of steps over the last couple of years to address this problem with the e-cigarette industry. The first thing we did is come out with a regulation that called to treat e-cigarettes like combustible cigarettes, say that you can't purchase them unless you're 21 years old. That later became a law. We then opened up investigations into Juul, the leading e-cigarette manufacturer. We took action against some online retailers, people who were selling online into the state of Massachusetts, sent cease and desist orders to them because they were flouting that law and selling to people underage, and we actually shut them down. And we also sued another e-cigarette manufacturer, Eon Smoke, for its practices in marketing, we allege, to young people. So we've taken a number of actions. I've also been over at the State House testifying in support of a tax on e-cigarettes and a ban on flavors. And I'm continuing to get out there, as my team is, to try to educate parents, educate the public about what's happening out there, and telling them that help is available, encouraging them to talk to their medical providers. I think you got to be hard on this. I think you need to support things like bans on flavors, the taxing of e-cigarettes. You also need to support educational resources. That's really important. We need to educate parents. We need to educate young people about the dangers of e-cigarettes. I am all for adult use. Adults can make their own choices, right? And some would argue that e-cigarettes are a way to stop smoking. They're a transition from combustible cigarettes to not smoking at all. I understand that, but what we've seen, unfortunately, is that this is a market that's really been exploited at the expense of our young people. I'd also encourage the public generally, not only those in elected office, but also parents to understand that there's help out there. You know, you may find yourself with a kid at home who's vaping. Their friends may be vaping. I just want parents to know that there are wonderful medical professionals out there who are treating a lot of kids right now in our state. You're not alone. If you're a parent with a young person who's vaping, you're not alone. Unfortunately, there are a lot of parents who are going through this. So talk to your doctor, talk to your medical provider, and they'll help you with the resources to treat this sort of nicotine addiction. We need help at the federal level. We can do a lot as states, and in fact, some cities and towns here in Massachusetts have taken their own action. But we need help from the federal government. We need help from the FDA. It's still the Wild West when it comes to basically the non-regulation of e-cigarettes. They're not really regulated at the federal level through the FDA. That needs to change because this is a public health risk particularly for young people. And so we're going to continue to call on the FDA, to call on the federal government to do its job and be a partner in this as well. And there are a number of things that I've also been working with other state AGs around the country. This is something that a lot of us are focused on. Some other states have also sued or opened up their own investigations. I think you'll continue to see more of that because we recognize how pervasive this problem is. And it's our job to do everything we can to stand up and try to protect the health and well-being of our young people.